everyone, before I begin my Easter sermon, let me first introduce myself. My name is Rabbi Alisa Zilbershtein, and I'm a new assistant rabbi here at Beth Tikvah. And many of you know me, but I also see a lot of new faces. So I'll try to come and greet you and speak to you after the services, but I also invite you to come to me and introduce yourself. And also, I am teaching today a class on Hasidic masters about Yom Kippur at 3:30 p.m. So it would be great if you can join, and I would like to use this opportunity today to meet you. My husband Victor and I came to Toronto at the beginning of July this year. And this sermon is going to be very personal because of the circumstances that brought us here. And I want you to know a little bit more about me and understand where I'm coming from. My apartment in Kiev is very small, but it is located in the most beautiful neighborhood of the city. Under the windows of my apartment in Kiev, beautiful cherry trees grow. One of those trees, Victor and I grew together from just a little twig. And in spring, the street where my apartment is located is drowning in cherry, apricot, and plum blossoms. On spring nights in my apartment in Kiev, I keep all of my windows open, and I'm awakened by the gentle breeze that brings the sweet fragrance of the cherry flowers. Did you ever lie in bed and delight with the sweet smell of spring flowers? And in the morning, I go to the balcony of my apartment with a cup of hot tea, and my balcony is covered by cherry petals. In summer, I stretch my hand out of my window and pick the red cherry berry, and I don't even need to go outside because they grow so close. By the end of summer, grapes ripen on my balcony. They are sweet and sour, and they attract a lot of wasps who fearlessly fight with sparrows for the right to feast on ripe grapes. My apartment in Kiev is located in an area called Podil, and this is an old Jewish neighborhood, and Jews lived in that part of the city for hundreds of years. And the history of Jews in Kiev as almost as ancient as the city itself. The first original text about Kiev, known to historians and dating back to 10th century of Common Era, was written in Hebrew. And the Jewish part of the population of Kiev made an invaluable contribution in the development of the city, and Jews built a lot of houses, public and religious buildings, without which the architectural appearance of the capital of Ukraine is just unimaginable. In my neighborhood alone, where I lived, there are 5 synagogues, a mikvah, a kosher shop, a kosher restaurant, all within walking distance from my apartment. This is the apartment that we bought with my husband Victor together. Our first home as a family, the first place we furnished together, where we cooked our first meals together, where we watched our first Netflix series together, where we celebrated our first high holidays together. This is the first place that we called our true home. But our life changed forever on the night of February 24th, 2022. And I remember that night so sharply, like it happened not even yesterday, but an hour ago. We were in New York, where I was finishing my rabbinic education, and I sit on my bed, staring at my phone, as young people call it, a nightmare rectangle, watching my country collapse in the real time. Russia bombs Ukraine. Tanks are breaking through the border. Closer and closer, they're coming to my city, to my apartment that I called my first true home. The first thing that really helped me during the first hours of the full-scale invasion actually was my training as a Jewish activist. All the leadership programs I went through, they finally paid off. I knew I had to act fast. What those trainings taught me was personal responsibility. Don't wait and see. Don't sit and wait until someone will come to your rescue because you are the rescuer. And as a Jewish activist, I have a lot of friends in my personal network who are also activists. And I message them immediately and we connect fast as the speed of the internet connection. And at the same day as the full-scale invasion began, our work began. For the next 4 months, until I came to Toronto, all my time, all my energy, all my existence was dedicated to one sole purpose: helping people in Ukraine. I was exhausted. For the first time in my life, the words spoken by Moshe in the book of Dvarim became a reality. In the morning, you shall say, if only if it were evening. And in the evening you shall say, if only if it were morning, because of what your heart shall dread and what your eyes shall see. Every morning, the first thought that came to my mind was, God, please let me go back to sleep. I don't want to wake up to this reality. And in the evening, all I wanted was for the day to be over, because every minute of my life was immersed in anguish and pain. But the most terrifying aspect of this verse is explained by Rashi. He asked this question: what morning are we talking about? If the morning of the next day was going to be full of suffering again, why would you want it to come? And he explains that the verse means that a person wishes for the morning of the previous day, the morning that will never come, because the misery will constantly grow more severe, and the curse of each hour will be greater than that of preceding. That is exactly how I felt and how I still feel today. Each hour of the war is worse than the previous, because every hour more people are dying, more houses, schools, hospitals, roads are destroyed, and more pain comes to this world. It is tempting to read on the news about some success of Ukrainian army and think that the situation is improving. I understand it. But the situation is not getting better. Entire towns are being wiped out and destroyed to the ground. Soldiers and civilians are being killed. Right now, as we sit here at Beth Tikvah and might feel hungry because of the fast, someone is sitting in a basement starving because he is being tortured. With every passing hour and every passing minute, the situation is getting worse. It is not getting better. And try to hold this thought in your mind for more than an hour and try not to be driven bad by what your eyes behold, as Moshe said. War brings everything to extreme. It reveals the worst qualities in humans. Some absolutely regular people become murderers and maniacs, but some become selfless heroes and saviors. Some people turn into cowards. Some show titanic resilience. One thing that surprised me the most was the reaction of volunteers with whom I worked and continue working today. They showed no fear. Instead, we created an elaborated network of Jews and non-Jews cooperating together without any formal leadership. And I felt no fear. Surprising myself, I did not panic, as if I knew what to do precisely, like I fought in the war before, though I never did. And the truth is, I knew what to do. My grandmother, Alea Shalom, taught me what to do. Her name was Alisa, and I was named after her. And she was my best friend growing up, my ultimate role model, and the person I miss the most in my life. She passed away 11 years ago, but every time I think of her, tears come to my eyes. She was my closest person in life. My grandma, Alisa, she was very educated. She had 2 degrees, and she had phenomenal memory, and she taught me a lot about the Second World War. She was also very talented in writing fairy tales and even published a little book for children. She taught me what to do when I was a child by telling bedtime stories, like many grandmas do. But those stories were not always fairy tales. For example, she would tell me a story about how people donated valuable things they had to support army during the war. And my favorite part of the story was a type of a Q&A question. I may call it a jewelry box. I would ask her, "Grandma, what would you donate if there was a war?" And she told me, "My jewelry." "What jewelry?" I asked with bated breath. And she said, "I have a pair of earrings and a brooch." She did not have a lot of jewelry, but I laughed when she was talking about it. I laughed in my mind to go through the jewelry box and imagine a pair of beautiful earrings that would help to win the war. And I asked her to retell the story endless amount of times, but she did more than that. She was a young woman when the German fascist army invaded the Soviet Union, and she volunteered to work at the factory that produced military weaponry for the Soviet army. After the war, she was awarded a medal of a home front worker for selfless labor during the Second World War. And that was my grandmother. She never told me the purpose of those games and those stories, but they created an intergenerational connection that allowed me to picture myself in the past and be ready for what happened in future. And one needs to understand how deeply the experience of the Second World War is embedded in our historical memory, and how deep and fresh is the wound of Holocaust, even 2 generations later. My childhood practice of fantasizing about what would I do if I lived in 1940s without my knowing or understanding shaped my consciousness around the war. So last spring, I began reaching out to every Jewish community I could think of to invite me to speak in front of the public, to tell what was happening in Ukraine. And the response of the Jewish community was unbelievable. People from the US and Canada began sending me money without even knowing me personally to support war relief efforts in Ukraine. The kindness, compassion, generosity of the Jewish community positively shocked me. I realized how blessed I am to be a Jew. Individual Jews who never met me in person were willing to give me money on pure trust, just because I'm also a Jew and a rabbinical student at that time. And I firmly believe that this amazing response of the Jewish community is rooted in our historical memory and the ability to envision ourselves in the situation of war and persecution. In Jewish tradition, we retell the stories of Exodus at the Pesach table in order to teach the next generation about our common historical heritage and experience. We say every generation, a person must regard themselves as though they personally had gone out of Egypt. And during Sukkot, we sit in the booth and we relive the experience of our ancestors in the wilderness. On Hanukkah, we light candles, envisioning how the menorah was lit in the Holy Temple. We as Jews have very special relationship with time. We're always connected to our past, which is our present and our future. Our holiday cycle make us relive the same episodes of our history over and over again so that we never forget that we were strangers in the land of Egypt, how we were standing at the Mount Sinai, how we were taken into exile. All our rituals are designed in such a way that forces us to remember. On Shabbat Kiddush, we sing about the creation of the world. On wedding, we break the glass as a reminder of the destruction of the temple. Today, we witness destruction again. On the day when I was writing this sermon, Ukraine liberated the occupied territories in Kharkiv Oblast. And the first horrific discovery was a mass grave of 447 people in the town called Izum. In that mass grave were found bodies of 215 women, 194 men, 5 children, and 22 soldiers. Entire families are buried there. For example, 31-year-old Yelena and 33-year-old Dmitry Stolpakov, together with their 2 daughters, Lesya and Sasha, 5 and 8 years old. Both parents were younger than me when they died. They spent their last minutes of their lives hiding in the basement of their home. Some other people were found hand-tied, some with nooses on their neck, and some were tortured to death. And I'm not going to tell you what kind of tortures they went through, but I assure you that these are the most brutal and painful tortures a person can imagine. And for what? Why they were killed? The answer is simple: because they were Ukrainians. When I was reading about it and looking at the photos of twisted and distorted bodies, I could not think about Holocaust. And I know that comparison to Holocaust is controversial and it is not accurate. These are different wars, and the people of Ukraine are not in the same situation as Jews were during World War II. But for me, it feels like it's happening all over again. I am heartbroken for all women, children, and men that die there every day. Izum, the town where mass graves were found, is the town where my younger brother, Dmitry, spent his childhood. Just like he enjoyed summers at the grandparents' house, there were little boys and girls in the summer of 2022. And now there are no more. Every child who died in Izum is like my brother to me. I understand why the situation in Ukraine might not feel to you the same as it feels to me, but our Jewish tradition, old and wise, carrying experience of thousands of years, offer us the most powerful tool to overcome the indifference. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we're all judged by the Almighty. On Rosh Hashanah, the decree is inscribed, and on Yom Kippur, it is sealed. And what is the decree? Our possible future is described in the words of Untane Tokev, and we are forced to imagine what might happen to any of us in the coming year. How many shall pass away, and how many shall be born? Who shall live and who shall die? Who shall reach the end of his days, and who shall not? Who shall perish by water, who by fire, who by sword, and who by wild beast? Who by famine, and who by thirst? Who by earthquake, and who by plague? Who by strangulation, and who by stoning? Who shall have rest, and who shall wander? Who shall be at peace, and who shall be pursued? Who shall be at rest, and who shall be tormented? Who shall be exalted, and who should be brought low? I always found the words of Untane Tokev to be the most powerful part of our liturgy. It is scary, but it is awakening, because who knows if we are going to live next year or die? Some of the possible ways to die from the Untane Tokev list might not seem so realistic. At least that was I thought, but I don't think like that anymore. Who shall perish by a sword or a bullet in the neck of the head in the basement of Bucha? Who by famine and who by thirst in Mariupol, dying of starvation when the city was besieged? Who by stoning, buried alive when a missile hit the home where they were sleeping? Who by strangulation, like a man with a noose on his neck in Izum? Today, my apartment in Kiev is cold and empty. No one enjoys the change of the season and the beautiful autumn colors of my cherry trees. I don't know if I will see my apartment ever again, if I ever smell the fragrance of the cherry blossoms. My home is just a few hours away by plane, but this distance is infinite, as if it is in a different dimension, parallel reality, the reality of loss, pain, and the most profound grief. I'm standing here in front of you, but my heart is in my home. My body is here, but my spirit is in a different dimension. My heart is broken 1,000 times a day when I read how another building was destroyed, how a missile hit another home, and how another family was buried or burned alive. I see it every day, and I know that my world is lost forever. If I ever go back home, it is not going to be the same. The streets of Kiev, with its coffee shops and the smell of pastry, summer markets and food festivals, songs and dancings are never going to be the same. My longing for the life that will never come back is immense. We all have such memories, I believe, for the first home that you bought, your happy places, the places that you loved. I have them too, but my happy places are being destroyed every day, and I can't stop it. The war, like mincing machine, destroys everything I ever loved, and I will never be the same, and my world will never be the same. Since the beginning of the war until I came to Canada, I did not cry because my friend Masha from Ukraine told me, I will not shed a tear for the tyrant who caused this war. He does not deserve it. And I did not cry. But here at Beth Tikvah, sitting in my new office, being a rabbi of this wonderful congregation I didn't even dream about, I burst into tears for the first time, because part of me finally realized that I'm not coming back home. I was running away from the thought, but here in the safety of Beth Tikvah and prosperity of Canada, it finally got to me and I began crying. In Brachot 32b, Rabbi Elazar says, though the gates of prayer have been locked, nevertheless the gates of tears are never closed. This exception is derived from the verse, hear my prayer, O Lord, give ear to my cry, do not disregard my tears, for like all my forebears, I am an alien resident with you. Today, for the first time in my life, I will pray at Iskor with you, and I invite you to pray with me for everything that you lost, for memories of your childhood, for dreams that never come true, for those who will never return, for your parents, grandparents, for your brothers and sisters, for your children. And I will pray for everything and everyone that war is taking from me every passing day. And if I will never see the cherry trees on my street again, let them bloom without me. And let new people come to my empty apartment. And let the new generation of children dance in the streets of Kiev. May all our prayers reach heavens today, and may the ruler of the world show mercy and judge us fairly. Gmar Chatima Tova, may we all be written in the book of life.